back to Information Revolution, a podcast for people working with information. My name is Michael Upton. I'm an information management consultant in a little company called Metataxis in New Zealand.
And I'm Judi Vernau. I also work for that little company in New Zealand, and I'm an information architect.
And I'm Karl Melrose. I work for Castlepoint Systems in Canberra, but my views are my own.
Nice. So, in our last episode, we were talking about the failures of EDRMS, and we mentioned Microsoft 365 a few times. It has come up, a bit of a hot topic, so we thought we'd do an episode where we just basically talk 365 head on. So I think to do that, we're going to have to assume a little bit of knowledge of how it works, but perhaps where there's kind of things that we think are beyond document management solutions, we might go a bit broader in terms of what we might explain things a bit when it comes to those things. So who would like to kick us off?
Well, I was just thinking back to what we were talking about in the last episode about EDRMS and thinking that although with less emphasis on the R bit, but thinking about it as a document management system, my experience of the early SharePoint, so 2007, 2010, what was the next one, 2013, was all good, actually, just in terms of document management. So it was really flexible. People liked it. You could set it up to, generally suit the kind of workflows, and it was reasonably easy to set up the workflows, set up metadata that people would find, suited to their particular line of business again, within the overall company. And then it seemed to turn to custard slightly when 365 came in, and there are all these other fantastic bits of functionality that you can use, but then too much functionality almost. I'm not saying that's true, but I think there's a view that
it's certainly sprawled.
Yeah, there are so many things you can do. There are so many different places. We talked last time about where do you put your stuff? And in 365, there are so many places where you could put your stuff that it's become really confusing again. So it's gone from something that seemed to be relatively straightforward, nice and flexible, easy to use, to something that's become, as you say, sprawly and needing to be very carefully managed in order to make it successful, which it can be.
But I mean, it's still, for me, it's just interesting. We didn't touch on it in the EDRMS episode, but the real failure point there, I think, if you're going to put down the high impact kind of things you could do, if you could get control of creation, you can make the EDRMS model work. Because it's really about that. If there's only one place you can create your record or create your information, then you can do a lot with that. I mean, that's the thing with Microsoft 365. I mean, if nothing else, you can get right down to the application level, and you can say, right, all the people in our organization, you can only save things in SharePoint Online, or you can only save things in Teams, or whatever it happens to be. You can actually get policy control of that moment of creation. And I think that's if there was nothing else in Microsoft 365 that was good, I think that little bit of functionality, should make everybody in records management sit up and take notice. Whatever your view is about its level of compliance, I mean, this is the field we work in. It doesn't jump the bar, but is it? The thing that I always like to get to on Microsoft 365 is, I've always looked at the strategic power of records as being the ability to help people organize and manage their work. It's something that started out as records are an aid to memory, but then they're how we communicate, they're how we organize ourselves, and that goes well beyond documents. I mean, one of my blog posts that I wrote recently, I was talking about how we focus a lot on findability, but we don't focus on something that I just termed presentability. There's probably an actual word for it, but that ability to take a specific piece of information and present it to someone
Right.
at
Yeah.
a point in time when they need it. I'm sure there's
Yeah.
a technical term for that someone else has, invented, but I don't know it. But, I see there's so much potential in Microsoft 365 for that. SharePoint lists for me,
Mm.
they are a
Mm.
great organizing tool. And what are they? Really, they're just, metadata.
Mm.
They're a something significant and then some metadata associated with it. And I mean, you can do so much with them. You
But for
can
those
drive.
who,
Yep.
I think lists is one that's worth calling out. Just quickly describing for people. So a list is essentially like a superpowered spreadsheet, and one of the
It's a
key.
register.
Yeah, it's a register. It's absolutely a register. So two things about that. It doesn't need to be document centered. So you can attach documents to lists, but they don't have to be present. So for instance, you could be doing, well, let's talk about registers. It could be an asset register. It could be service request register. You could create a service catalog of what your team does, and as lists, you don't need to attach documents to those things. You can do it all with just data. And one of a few things that are better than doing that in a spreadsheet is that you manage each row, if you like, of what you imagine in a spreadsheet. So you get a data entry form, so you can constrain and control how people put information in, which is way better than faffing with a spreadsheet and hoping that they put things in the right column. Um, and you manage each item. So each item can have version control. Each item could have a retention period if you wanted, and so on. And so you can manage those things in the register at that level rather than, just as this big lumpy thing that's got 700 versions, which is normally how a spreadsheet-based register happens. Yeah. So, I guess then that flows through into other functionality of 365, which I think adds to that idea of creating a kind of a sort of a thing that helps people be organised, I suppose, in their day is workflow. So you can trigger workflow off the creation or the change in an item in a list. You can do that straight off a document as well. Essentially, the document library basically may as well be a list, but it's a document-centered list. So it's
And I've
always.
I've seen those lists work fantastically well for
Mm,
information asset registers. I mean,
mhm.
but right from the early SharePoint doing that.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
as you say, you can use the form to store the information, but then populate the lists with it and make sure that things keep up to date. I've seen them used brilliantly well for OIA requests, all kinds of things. I mean, that's really cool,
Seen
flexible
I use them to
functionality.
manage my own work. Lots of
yeah.
different things that I do
Right,
routinely.
right.
Honestly, they're brilliant. And we've got I've lots of organisations I've worked in. I've used them with routines that we have as groups. We get together and we go through the status of things and we manage the status in a SharePoint list, and
Yeah.
so that people know where something is up to and they know whether they need to hit the panic button or not. And because you can trigger Power Automate workflows off them, you can trigger. If you're 5 days out from something and a field hasn't been set to a certain value, you can send everybody a reminder to say you're 5 days away from this, and
It's
like it's
great.
things like that. And
And
they don't seem like recordsy things
no, true.
for a lot of people, but
And they can be in the area, as it were, that you're working in as well. So you don't have to go somewhere else for this.
yeah,
It can be within your general workspace.
Yeah,
yeah, but
within
they
your
help.
SharePoint site or team. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they
Uh,
also raise the quality of the information that people are working with. This is the thing that I keep coming back to. Records management. We've got to be raising the quality of the business information that people are working with, and taking something out of a spreadsheet and putting it into a list where you stop having to deal with all of those problems that people can copy it and move it and everything else, you know, does improve the quality of it.
Yeah.
Being able to drive workflows off it and those sorts of things. I mean, it improves the quality of the records that people are working with and the quality of the records they're creating because you can constrain the input. I mean,
It's
there's
a very specific thing. I think it was just such an elegant thing that made me so happy when I saw it happening. Way down in the detail is Terry. If you're listening, thank you so much for this tip. You can create a separate list as your audit trail as well, so you can actually use the list and workflow functionality to push events into another list, which becomes your audit trail, and then you
Oh,
change the
cool.
permissions on that second list so that people can't mess with it. And suddenly you've got basically just a fully customizable view of what audit events matter for your particular situation. And more generally, if you've got concerns that, a list might get a bit feral and out of control and we don't have the right audit trail, well, there you go. Make yourself one.
Yeah.
and,
But
you
that's
know,
it. Lists and then a
That is
log.
that is
yeah,
And I mean,
cool.
yeah, I love
yeah,
it.
it's
Yeah,
great, isn't it? Just such
yeah.
an innovative use of the tools.
And I think, one thing I would also say about this is that people also do joke that it's the new Microsoft Access database, as in working with lists. And I think fair enough in the sense that there's sort of this sort of, in terms of, we talk about the risks of shadow IT, of people being able to create their own sort of point solutions, and um, the risks around that are usually about how do you maintain that thing and how do you make sure that it's going to not fall over, particularly if it becomes critical to your business. And yeah, okay, that's fair. But in terms of how lists are integrated into the broader solution and how you can bring compliance controls to bear, like versioning and yeah, this idea of an audit trail that way. But I mean, there's also the audit events happening in the background of 365. You can apply retention, so on and so on. Like, I think they're way less scary than an Access database, which typically sitting on a shared drive was its own
Mm,
little black box. And from the
yeah,
outside, from an
yeah.
overview, from an oversight perspective, yeah, they were much scarier. Yeah. I think that oversight point is also one that I want to bring up. Oversight in the sense of having sight of things, not oversight in the sense of, whoops, missed that one. Um, and because even the things that stress me out the most, which would be to do with the amount of work you can do inside your OneDrive and the risks associated with that. So OneDrive being basically like your own supercharged personal folder where you can actually share out entire folder structures. So you could build your own empire of, sort of a taxonomy, if you like, and then you could share that with whoever you need to work with, and you could be working out of OneDrive, which has all those problems you'd expect in terms of, uh, if someone leaves, then basically everything's associated with their account, so you could lose that information. Um, so, sorry, even in that scenario, it's still in the same sort of system. It's still in the same environment in which you can uh, basically manage risk by, for instance, doing searching, by configuring things like sensitive information types, which you can custom create to identify things that meet certain risk profiles. Sensitive information types is something where people typically think it's something security folks might do, but basically you can say, I want to build a set of criteria to identify certain kinds of things, and I want to receive alerts when those things exist. Or I want to be able to go to a dashboard in Microsoft Purview and see those things when they exist. Those kinds of mechanisms exist for OneDrive where they did not exist for someone's desktop, or
Yeah, and I
someone's
want to
H drive
label
or whatever.
those things and stop people sharing them, and it's a control that
Potentially,
actually works.
yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
That's it.
that
Yeah, and
is the thing, isn't it?
I, I do think that stuff's quite hard, and quite a lot of effort will need to be sunk into figuring that stuff out. So it's definitely not starting this episode going, Microsoft's amazing and I freaking love it. But it's just, I, I'll be upfront that my agenda in this episode is to try and convey that I think it's a lot better than where things have been with an EDRMS. And I think
Mm,
part of why we probably ordered things the way we did is because you have to be honest about where things are at in terms of an EDRMS
Mm,
before you start going, well, there are these problems with 365, but you need to be clear on, A, what success looks like, and B, what the kind of current state of play actually is in terms of EDRMS versus 365. Yeah, and I think the opportunity here, is so significant and so worth chasing. Yeah.
Do you think anybody out there is buying a new EDRMS now? or is everybody going to 365, which is my perception of the case. I know some of the vendors are still producing upgraded versions, but are they fighting a losing battle there actually?
I don't know, I mean, and I have to be a little bit careful because this is very close to work for me.
Yeah.
But I mean, I still see people buying EDRMS systems. I mean,
Right.
and there's a real question that people have around Microsoft 365 is long term. Because they are a little bit concerned that it is one of these systems that gets updated regularly, and that Microsoft have retired features. They're about to retire wikis as a feature that's in Teams, so you won't be able to create those anymore. And I haven't actually read them. I'm relying on the secondhand information here, but from what I understand, the sort of path out of those is that essentially, create OneNote files, and because they're moving to OneNote as the preferred tool.
That's right.
So that they do
auto migration. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah, but so I mean, what does that mean? So there's lots of people that are really quite concerned, and I mean, if you've got retention requirements for things that like in medical, fields, and lots of other places where you've got really long-term retention, people are really concerned about, but just both the mutability of the content, just keeping it on a cloud platform that, they don't have some control of, and also the ability to continue to access that content, into the long term. And I think that's, I mean, there's lots of, they're sort of standard EDRMS features, right? They're one of the things that EDRMS was designed to tackle and actually tackles quite well. And I don't know that Microsoft have given us a lot of sense about what that stuff's going to look like. I mean, it's interesting that, everybody who was talking Microsoft and how it was compliant for about 20 years, also ignored the fact that the longest retention period, I think, was 7 years or something like that for metadata. And, now it's 10 years if you buy the extended metadata retention license. But even then, you've got to pick what metadata, you want to keep over that time period.
Yeah.
I mean, these things, it's leapt forward in the last couple of years, but, there's still enough uncertainty that people are absolutely upgrading and investing in, EDRMS.
Yeah. I reckon, Karl, you mentioned cloud in passing. Like, I think there's a whole conversation you could have about cloud, and essentially, a really negative perspective is that, well, it's not necessarily negative. It might just be true. Is that the government is basically outsourcing its information infrastructure, and basically putting it in other people's computers, and that's there's really obvious risks around that in the long-term view. It's an extension of what's always been happening with physical records management, where we outsource stuff to big providers like your Iron Mountains and whoever else, TIMG in New Zealand. But there is added complexity when you're talking about cloud, I think. But I do feel like that's a whole other topic, so I think
sure.
maybe
I just want to know what's the game. I mean, the thing that drives me crazy is that I see case studies popping up all the time of, EDRMS, agency moves their EDRMS from on-premise to the cloud.
Yeah.
And it, the press release, vendor case study, and, so what?
So what? Yeah.
What actually changed? Okay, it's good that, it's a signal to other people using that system that, you can move it to the cloud and it won't break everything. Someone else has done it, but, cui bono, who benefits? I can't figure it out. If capture rates are as low for EDRMSs, some people have very publicly, in regulatory positions have very publicly said that they think they are. Okay, we've just moved it to the cloud. Well, so what? How did that improve the business of the agency? How did that improve the quality of information?
Welcome to the 21st century.
Yeah. And I guess to come back to something you said earlier, Karl, about concerns about the direction of things. I mean, one of the aspects of potential benefit is that a cloud solution ought to be more flexible in terms of So in the case of Microsoft can provide updates in a much, much more regular cadence than you would get with on-premise stuff. We've probably all been through that scenario where you've got some system that's been sitting there for ages, and an upgrade could take 6 to 18 months, perhaps. Depending on the complexity of the
Integrations.
organization and integrations. Yeah. So there is definitely a benefit there. And I've seen, like some really fundamental things that I always thought were completely crazy about SharePoint, where, for instance, just moving and copying files, like it's only been, I don't know how
True.
many years, but it's really
True.
only been a few years that they've actually provided a public interface where you can move a file from one site level, so, a kind of reasonably high level container, to another.
Yeah,
Whereas
that's true.
the answer used to be that you drag the thing to your desktop and then,
Yeah,
delete the
that
one
was a
from the
nightmare. I'd
source. And
forgotten
then,
that.
I mean,
Yeah,
what? Like, and to
I
me,
know.
that breaks not, just at the DM level, not even the RM level. That was crazy. But of course, it's fixed and it works really smoothly now. Well, actually, I have had some bugs, but but for small amounts, it's fine. Yeah.
I mean, there is just a little bit of, I think Microsoft 365 is brilliant, and I'm definitely on record as having said that I just think there's so much power there. But there are just those little niggles that people have, the little concerns that particularly I do see just a little bit of concern from some of the agencies that really can't get things wrong.
Yep.
About loss and those sorts of things. And, there's still just that question too for me about, are people actually backing it up? Because,
Right.
it is,
Yep.
Oh, right.
I
Okay.
do remember AWS, and for just to make sure I'm not defaming anybody, it may not have been AWS, it may have been another large cloud provider, but I do remember seeing something pop up on like Ars Technica or something like that saying that, big cloud vendor has lost, loses, it was like 0.065% of, one region of their cloud or something like that. And it was like 40 petabytes of data. And the businesses that were, on that service, it's just gone. And, that kind of thing, crypto locker and all those sorts of things, ransomware and those sorts of things, they've done that to on-premise systems in lots of places. And, you know, people do occasionally lose systems, but I think there is a little bit of a concern for a lot of people that, realistically backup, should alleviate.
My first
Yeah.
experience with administering 365 was in a company where, we ran a third party backup and just backed up the entire solution. It was very cheap. And it was just treated as an insurance policy. It wasn't that kind of file level of like, oh, someone might stuff this up and we'll restore it. It's not about that at all. It was more, if our entire tenancy went to custard for whatever reason, could we still access our data in a format that we could reuse, put somewhere else?
But it doesn't get away from the fact that there is so much there that just lets us get so close to the users and
Mm.
actually lets us help them organize and manage their work. And once you've got people organizing and managing their work using, something that we can apply policy controls to, all of a sudden records just should become a snap. It should become easy.
It should become easy.
Yeah. So
But
Judy, you talked earlier about how you kind of felt that things had like there was a kind of a dip when 365 functionality came along in terms of things sprawling and so forth. Yeah.
yeah.
Any further thoughts on kind of architecting,
Well,
architecting environments now?
I still think it's I don't I don't think I've seen any particularly good implementations yet.
Right. Yeah.
And that's just me, and I haven't been traveling around the
What
place
does
as
a
much as I did at one time, but
what does
I
a good implementation look like for you?
I think, well, we talked earlier about, or was it last week, about the tension between the records management and the users. I mean, my main interest is that the users are just being able to do their work and find what they want. And records managers, yes, we've got to help them as much as we can, but I guess there are other ways of sometimes dealing with that, perhaps. But just thinking about it from a user perspective, I haven't yet come across an implementation where people felt comfortable that they were finding everything that they needed to find, or indeed were working in a space where they, how can I put this? They kind of felt they knew where they were, as it were. Because I think one of my problems with 365 is having that context to where you are, and quite often you can't see further than the site that you're on, for example.
The next thing you can click to.
And and I think that that's an issue. I think it's particularly an issue that people don't know where things are stored anymore, like they didn't used to know where things were before. A particular issue of mine right now with a client is, I know I've seen it. I mean, one of those 4 kinds of finding things, you've seen it before. And for me, I know I saw it. Where was it? It was probably in the chat, and which chat was it?
Yeah.
Is a complete nightmare.
But I mean, it's
Yeah.
interesting because we're getting back to the social routines around these things as well. Where
And
do we
and I
put
think,
things?
and I also think that things like people not being in the office so much, and lockdown and all that, have also contributed to the sprawl of some of these things, where people are creating. I mean, it's a small example, I guess, but like chats, because it's the way that they can communicate with other people, just to say, how are you doing? And here's a photo of my dog, kind of thing, which just adds to more stuff that we have to wade through to actually find. So there's 6 pictures of dogs. Sorry, dog lovers. 6 pictures of dogs, and then the document that I actually need in order to do my next piece of work, which I couldn't have found by trying to find it just by searching. That wouldn't have worked. And I
Mm.
don't know where it
Um,
is in the site. Maybe it's not in the site that I'm working in. Maybe it's in some other site, but I can't even see the rest of the business.
yeah,
So
I think
if I'm interested in what the research guys are doing, I can't go to look there. I have to search for something and hope I find something, and then try and explore around that. But I really have tunnel vision imposed on me in this, just in some implementations,
I
which is,
100% agree with that.
Yeah.
As one of the real challenges is that I see so much benefit when it comes to kind of the opportunity to sort of architect or design or just deliver a reasonable kind of little bubble for day-to-day work, I suppose, and it's it's acknowledging that there's also those other situations where, say I'm new and I just want to understand kind of
exactly,
across the organization, like what are people up
absolutely,
to and where's the stuff about blah. That's always been pretty crap in my opinion,
yeah,
and always been a challenge in terms of understanding, you know, um, an EDRMS or shared drives, good lord. But I don't think that's got better. I don't think, I think that's still something where, if I were going to think about how do I invest effort in, or what should you invest effort into in terms of actual kind of delivering a benefit to end users, I actually think there's something about presenting some kind of an interface to people that shows them the extent of what you have, because that just doesn't
definitely,
show up out of the box. Like
yeah,
it's one of the um, it's one of those things where the tools are there, but it's just not how the thing works out of the box. So, for instance, I can't see across all SharePoint sites as an end user. I can't see all the sites that I'm allowed to view
yeah.
in a list or
Well,
in
you
some kind of a
you
structure
probably,
unless someone builds it for me.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think that's really important, and I think it's the extreme other version of um, the big bucket approach, where all you can see is the search box, and you type your search in there, and you've got absolutely no idea what else is around. But I mean, obviously, you don't want to be able to see every other site immediately, because there's probably 6,000 sites actually, I'm probably too low on that, aren't I? 20,000 sites out there,
Yeah.
and I don't. But some way of grouping things. I always say the logical groupings that will give me a sense of what's where. And then I can
Yeah, I mean,
explore those bits. It's a taxonomy,
it's a
that I
taxonomy.
can drill
So
down
this could be,
into, when I want to.
and I'd emphasize like the features are there. There's,
They're
you could
there.
be
I know
doing this.
they are
You could be doing
there.
this
Yeah.
with hub site navigations. You could be doing this with actual, pages. I always try and push for kind of information and records folks. The fact that you can basically create your own custom web pages with whatever you
Yeah.
want on them is an
yeah,
asset
using as
Yeah.
to
It's
navigation points.
it's an
fantastic.
asset
It's
to
fantastic.
delivering structure to people. Creating those logical groupings. So that's another way you could be doing it. So it's
I mean,
there, but
simple,
you have to create it, right? You have to put the effort in.
but
But it's worth
simple.
it. It's really worth it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but simple social routines around these things too. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there was little thought I had. Are we asking too much here? Well, if you want to find out what people are doing, go and talk to them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the other option. Why be covert and go and trawl through their records to find out
Oh,
what
I
they're
see
doing
what you're
when you can go
saying.
down and say, "Hey, what do you guys do?"
Yeah. Of course,
But
of course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but then you've got to
where I've
walk
seen,
through the whole building, whereas you could just walk through one interface and go, "Oh, yeah, okay, so that's what they do," rather than, miles through the building going,
Yeah.
"Hey, what do you do? What do you do?"
yeah, but get your steps up, get to know people,
Yeah.
But I mean, and given the distributed way of working, I mean,
You'd have to go
you know,
round
but
everybody's homes and knock on
Yeah.
exactly,
the
that's
door.
right. So, you'd really get your steps up.
Go to their desk and
Um,
it's the wrong day of the week, so they're not there.
Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah.
But where I see it work really well is simple routines and simple ideas. We have a project. We have a team for every project, and we add everybody from the project to the team. And then when the project's finished, the team is finished. Or we have a channel per case. And I know that sounds like it could be a disaster, but I've seen it work really well. And that channel becomes where we organise all the information for the case, and it also becomes the point at which if we want to have a chat about the case, well, we go to that channel to have the chat about the case, and we tag people in, whatever we need to do. Seen that stuff work really well, but it's the social routines. It's the thing I keep coming back to about all these things. The thing that actually makes them work is the social routines. Lists are brilliant, but lists become orphan data very, very fast unless you've got a social routine around going to the list and
sure.
updating it and everything else.
But that's brilliant, so that that if you want to find out everything about that case, you can go to that place and find the documents and the chat. Brilliant.
I feel like if we're talking about 365, we definitely do need to touch a bit on records. Like we're saying some stuff about it not being compliant, but I do want to emphasize that firstly, we were saying last episode how non-compliant EDRMS turns out to be in practice, So, there's that in mind. But even in terms of thinking about what matters in terms of,
Mm,
basically retention and disposition or disposal, you can put in place policies almost anywhere you like that will prevent destruction for a minimum period of time. And then you can put additional mechanisms on top of those that will bring stuff up for review. Obviously, it all depends on your licenses. There's heaps of caveats here. It's not as easy as I wish it were, but it's also such a broad scope of information compared to what we're used to with EDRMS that it's kind of no surprise that it's hard.
Yeah.
um, and I guess what I'd emphasize is that if your key concerns right now are around making sure that you don't lose information, it's simple to put in place retention policies, which are those really broad brush controls that can just simply say, if someone deletes something, keep it. If someone deletes something, put it somewhere else where we could review it later. And so you can, at the very least, buy yourself time. I think what will be really interesting is that probably this will continue to drive a situation where we're keeping more than we should, um, losing, rather than losing information.
better that way round, I guess.
I think so. And I don't know that that's much change from pre 365 because I think we were letting a bunch of stuff stack up on shared drives and things with no controls, or we were putting some small slice of content into an EDRMS where people just didn't have capacity. Just records folks typically do not have capacity to actually run disposition or run disposal. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of, I mean, Microsoft 365 for me just has the feeling of inevitability. It's not going away.
No,
and
no.
I mean, I think it's so good that, and it gives you all of the things that you just described. I mean, I don't see how you could be in records management and not have it as something that you wanted to use to get better control, get better visibility, all of those things. Just the fact that all of the document creation happens in things you can control with Microsoft 365. I mean, all of the email comes into the organization in things you can control with Microsoft 365. I mean,
yeah. And I mean, just bringing it, back, we talked about social routines, we talked about information architecture all the time. Like, I think a lot of those things will be the constraints. For example, if I want to put some really fancy rules across email, I'm not going to have the right information in the email probably to trigger those kinds of rules. So, there's a bunch of subtlety there, or at least an acknowledgement of where the work still is. The work is still in, um, you know, establishing good routines, establishing process, establishing tools that support the process. Yeah, and I don't think that will ever change. It's definitely not magic. It definitely doesn't just suddenly do everything for you at
no,
all.
nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing is. I mean, that's
No.
all
But
this stuff takes work.
it'll be interesting to see where Microsoft take it next.
Indeed.
As we've said, it's changing all the time. So
Yeah.
that is something to be aware of.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the things they're doing with loop components, though, and those sorts of things, where you're starting to be able to take one information resource and publish it in many places and have it all linking back to a single source of the truth. Where a point where you are publishing from. I mean, I think are really hopeful. Because that is the problem of every environment. I mean, email kind of broke everything because someone doesn't have that document. Well, we'll just email them a copy. Copies are cheap. We'll just email them a copy. And then and then records got really hard all of a sudden. Starting to establish some tools that don't require copies to be sent around. I mean, I think that stuff's really hopeful in terms of the direction things are going. Because I mean, I think Microsoft and everybody else are realizing that we can't just keep copying stuff and creating more things. And
been really eye-opening for me recently, working with a client who is using an older version of SharePoint on premise, and realizing and working in a context where we're locked down and I need to provide information to people outside of the site, the SharePoint site. And all I've got is attachments, right? All I've got is I'm going to send a copy as an attachment to, for instance, the finance people, the IT people who can't see where I do my core work. And I've always felt really nervous about the sharing links and things in SharePoint. I'll be honest. In SharePoint Online, so in the new versions of basically Microsoft 365, because it feels to me like there's all these risks around sending stuff out. Basically, people talk about Swiss cheese security, where you're punching holes in the permissions model by allowing these sharing links. But I've realized now it's like, all right, well, if I go back to kind of an older way of working that I was used to, I was sending uncontrolled copies via email. And
Yeah.
is that
Is
worse
that any less
than
secure or
creating a
more
shared link?
secure or yeah.
God, I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? How our perception of risk takes time to catch up.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
We're
indeed.
really
totally
does.
fine to
Really
send the
does.
whole document.
Yeah.
That anyone can send to anyone and print off and,
Yeah.
wallpaper in their office or on the local bus stop, depending on what they want to do.
Yeah.
But we won't send a link around when, we can cut the link off.
That's right. That's right.
Because
Yeah.
we're worried that people might send the link to other people. Well, we've sent the document, let's send the document.
Hey, guess what? The link is audited and, you can, as you say, you can cut it off. Like,
You can privilege control it. I mean,
you
that's the
reduce
best.
the risks of accidentally sending stuff. Well, if you send stuff to the wrong person, the worst thing is that they might be able to see that link if you don't configure it the right way. But, compared to sending an attachment to the wrong person, then they can definitely
Yeah.
open it.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. I reckon we've gone long enough on that one. There's certainly heaps more that we could say, and there's no doubt, to Karl's point, I just feel like there's no way we won't continue to mention 365 in terms of the
Yeah,
information
sure.
revolution that we're in. But yeah, thanks again. Once again, very interested in what people have to say in terms of your reactions to this. So thanks one and all. We'll catch you next time.
Bye
Thanks,
for
everyone.
now.